Yo, what's up? What's up? My name is Given Illustrative, and welcome to Millennial Pillars. Of course, we are hanging out on the I Am Youth Movement YouTube channel, and this is basically where we facilitate conversations that are relevant for how to navigate life in this modern era that we live in. So today, I want to have a conversation that's dear and quite a sentimental one. At the same time, I suppose it can be a conversation that any generation can find to be relevant because we're going to be talking about being born in a world that is messed up and that not being within your control because you're born in a world that's messed up and there's nothing you could have ever done about that, right? So for me, there's a lot of things that are very personal to me that I often feel as though it was quite unfair for me to be born within an era that suffers from certain problems. And I suppose, and I don't want to take for granted the fact that you yourself might have certain things that you feel like I was born in a world that lacks this or has too much of that. And as a result, I've suffered personally because of that, right? So I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts going through your mind right now because there's so many directions that this conversation can go. But I want to touch on the few things that I feel most of us can relate to, especially those of us who are still forming our identities and learning to discover ourselves as we grow, right? Like for instance, if you are a person who's a teenager, you might find that first of all you were born into a family that you feel like they're very distant, which was what my experience as well, which I've shared here on the channel. And you might feel that you were born in a family that could have loved you better, and that could have attended to you better, asked you questions about how your life is, and actually cared about the things that matter to you. We're born in a world where, for example, here in South Africa, the people who are in leadership are people who don't understand the dreams and goals and what drives a person who was born, for example, from the early 1980s all the way up to your 1990s. So as a result, we feel very alone, right? And there's something that I've picked up, honestly, about I think my generation, and particularly within where I live. So I live in Gauteng. It's a city area. So a lot of people that I encounter are coming from vastly different walks of life. Because where we live, a lot of people were not born here. We all came here. I come from a very small town, as you guys know. So that's the thing that I actually find to be fascinating. The fact that I could meet with people who come from so many different walks of life and share my experience of being born in a world that has so many aspects of it that I could have never controlled, right? You couldn't control the job availability where you live. You couldn't have controlled the parents you were born to. You couldn't have controlled the decisions that your parents made that ended up resulting in you suffering certain things that you could have rather not suffered, right? You didn't decide to be born in a country where, there are some of us who are born in countries that are at war. And as a result, we have to vacate those countries and migrate into other better countries. And you didn't choose that. And I want you to know that that's okay. It's not pressure that you need to put upon yourself that, you know what, I was born in this particular context and I wish I were born in a different context. Many people wish they were. A lot of people wish they were, especially privileged people as well. Let me not say especially. Let me rather say inform you that even privileged people tend to wish they were born in better circumstances. Considering the fact that I was born in South Africa, one of the wealthiest countries or on the continent of Africa, that alone, I'm privileged. I have very little to complain about when you're speaking in comparison to other people or other people who are not born here, who are struggling to even enter this country. And we have many examples of this. Even in the Bible, there were certain people. Paul was born and had to minister within the context of a tyrant, right? The Israelites were under governance under the Roman Empire, and I think it was the the current Caesar, or the current emperor rather, was not a friendly guy. He was very prejudiced towards the Christians of the time, and especially didn't like the riots that they were causing. So as a result, you found a lot of early Christians were born and had to minister and live through times where being a Christian was quite literally illegal. You weren't allowed to be a Christian. You weren't allowed to preach the gospel of Christ. So a lot of us, I mean, some of these, that's a very general way of looking at it, because a lot of us nowadays are not born in such countries. Very few people are that don't allow Christianity. But either way, you do experience some level of prejudice, right? From groups or from communities that wish we were more liberal and more accepting of their practices. So yeah, but I want you to know this. This is very important for you to understand the fact that you really need to not blame yourself for the things that you could have not controlled. And that's what we're talking about. That's the theme for this month of November, right? The fact that regardless of whether this is a job situation, regardless of whether this is a family situation where you feel you were born in a context or in a family drama that you actually wish you never had to deal with, that has led to you forming and shaping yourself in a particular way and hardening yourself as a result. I want you to know that you don't have to continue blaming yourself for this. Now, you might be asking yourself, why is it important for us to even be having this conversation? It is important for this. When we begin to realize that we were born in contexts that were not our fault, that we were born into situations that we couldn't control ourselves. Number one, the one thing we do is we cut ourselves some slack when we lag behind on certain things, right? There were certain things that I wish I were taught when I was younger. I wish I was taught discipline. I wish I was taken to a different school. I wish my parents were more intentional about surrounding me with kids who would influence me positively in all aspects of life, not just, trying to get me into groups of kids that weren't smoking and sleeping around, but even further than that, kids who were able to dream big and think globally and think, not too lowly of themselves, but actually have a sense of, I can do this. You understand what I mean? That type of attitude. And so many of us are in those situations where we wish we could have been born within those context that would have, somehow benefited us in the people that we've become today, if you're a grown up right now. So with that, and also secondly, I also wanted to mention this. It is also very, very, very important, mostly important for you to always remember to cast that burden unto God. The fact that you were born in a situation that you can't control, in a country that is probably has a climate or the economy is not doing well, there might be a war. I want you to remember that it's important for you to cast that burden unto God because He can handle it, right? Focus on what you can control. Discipline yourself in taking the talent that God is blessing you with and harness it. Find opportunities where you can actually harness your talent and focus on that. But don't try to control the things that you can't control because you'll drive yourself insane. It can lead to depression and anxiety. But just in your prayers, say to God, Lord, just bless me with the wisdom of being able to cast unto you the things I cannot control. That's a very important prayer to pray. And with that said, my name's Given Illustrative. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I will catch you next week, same time, same place. Peace out.